China's president has urged for what he calls a more just world order. Xi Jinping made the comments at the end of the BRICS summit that brought together Brazil, Russia, India, China and South Africa. So what sort of influence does BRICS have? This is Inside Story. Hello, welcome to the programme. I'm Jane Dutton. Brazil, Russia, India, China and South Africa may not seem to have much in common, but they've built a common ground through the international organisation known by the acronym BRICS. The coalition held its summit in China this week to discuss terrorism, governance and trade. 5 other countries, including Egypt and Kenya, also attended the meeting. So what's the future of this group that doesn't get much attention on the world stage? We'll put that to our guests in a moment. But first, Adrian Brown sets up our discussion from Beijing.
Well, BRICS was born on a real tidal wave of optimism. It saw itself as a group that could potentially replace the United States in leading the world's economy. It wanted to offer an alternative vision to the Western dominance of global affairs, a sort of counterweight to G7. Well, 10 years on, it hasn't actually worked out that way. 2 of its members, Brazil and Russia, are only now slowly emerging from recession. Brazil and South Africa have both been beset by political crisis. And of course, this organisation has been undermined in many ways by the deep rivalry and mistrust between India and China, borne out by a border dispute which was only resolved a few days before the latest BRICS summit opened in the Chinese city of Xiamen. Now, that summit ended with a 43-page communique. The language was very vague and broad. There were promises to combat terrorism, to deal with climate change and to fight protectionism. As to what this organisation has achieved in a tangible sense, well, its supporters say, look at the new development bank that it's set up that now has a headquarters in Shanghai that will lend money to members of the group. But actually, I think something has changed in the last few years, and it's this. China's leader, President Xi Jinping, is much more interested in what's going on around China. And that's borne out by his One Belt, One Road initiative, his plan to rebuild the fabled and ancient trading routes of Central Asia. That's where China is investing so much of its money, much more money, actually, than it's been investing in BRICS.
BRICS was formed to give the 5 emerging economies a platform to discuss trade and development. Most of the members came together in 2006, with South Africa joining 4 years later. The BRICS countries account for more than 40% of the world's population and have contributed more than half of the global economic growth over the past decade. That's according to the IMF. BRICS leaders say they've cooperated in over 30 areas, including agriculture, security, science and tourism. But it's difficult to pinpoint definitive signs of the collective's success. So what can we expect from BRICS going forward? Well, let's introduce our guests. In New Delhi, Sreeram, Chaulia, Professor and Dean at the Jindal School of International Affairs. In Beijing, Einar, who advises the Chinese government on economic development issues. And in Nairobi, Aly-Khan Satchu, CEO of Rich Management and an emerging markets economist. Welcome to all of you. Let me come to you first, Aly-Khan Satchu. So it's decades old now, BRICS. What are we looking at here? What has the body morphed itself into?
Well, I think it's been a tremendous phenomenon. If you look at it, just, the statistics you were talking about, it's contributing 50% of global GDP growth, 22% of the world economy. But I think more interesting is the new place that we've reached. Washington has kind of become an epicenter of global risk under President Trump, taken this very anti-globalist stance. And I think President Xi Jinping is moving into the vacuum, and BRICS is just one platform where he is the preeminent voice, and he is using it to further his agenda. At the heart of BRICS, we have an arrhythmic heartbeat, and I think that is between China and India. China has advanced in an incredible fashion right up to the border. It's next door in Pakistan. It's taken over the South China Sea, and it's challenging India in the Indian Ocean. So I think there are a lot of geopolitical fissures which are being covered up, particularly because this is an opportunity to promote this sort of anti-Trump, pro-globalist strategy. And I think that's what it's doing right now.
Before we deal with those fissures, Einar, Tangen, how big a player would you describe BRICS as being at the moment? And how important, considering what we're seeing in the world, the skirmishes?
Well, quite frankly, it's the only player or one of the few players that's out there. I would agree with my colleague that there's just not much alternative to the uncertainty being caused by Donald Trump. Now, in terms of fissures and things like that, yes, these are 5 very different countries spread geographically. 3 are resource-based. 2 are huge markets, huge populations. In theory, there should be a very good fit that could be put together, and they could help each other. The question is, can they overcome their fears about territorial encroachment? This does not only extend to India, but also to Russia, because China's Belt and Road Initiative will be going through a lot of areas which have been traditionally part of Russia. So while I don't necessarily agree that this is China trying to take over the world, they're not trying to invade any country. They're not trying to impose any ideology. They're simply trying to spread trade. If that's taking over the world, then I hope they come to many countries.
Sreeram, China marks this as one golden decade. And when you look at what's happening at the moment, it doesn't feel that way, does it, from an economic point of view or a political point of view? So what do you think he was referring to then?
I think the Chinese want to celebrate the completion of one phase of BRICS development. It's been built brick by brick, literally, BRICS. And if you go back over the last decade, there were many naysayers and skeptics and doubters who've been proved wrong by the fact that we have stuck together despite the differences in our alignments, in our foreign policies, in our domestic economic systems. We've stuck together. We have found traction in the idea. We have built a lot of institutions, mechanisms for cooperation. You mentioned 40 areas. There are probably many more. Now we have expanded beyond economics and have also gone to security level dialogue. And yeah, there are issues of perceived Chinese hegemony and domination. But I would still say that BRICS is a different type of intergovernmental institution and also spreading to societies where we are placing the principle of equity and equality foremost. So if you look at the share capitals of the New Development Bank, it's equally divided. If you look at the governance structures within BRICS that have evolved, it's based on egalitarian principles. So even if China is preponderant in terms of material capabilities, in status and dignity, all the member countries have come together. And on the question of the India-China dispute somehow disrupting the progress of BRICS, we have actually come around in a way. There's a reset underway, and compared to the bad blood of just a week ago, China and India have had a very fruitful bilateral on the sidelines of BRICS. So I think overall, I would say from 11 to 23% of world output, we have gone in 10 years, BRICS collectively. We have gone from 10% of world trade to 16%. We have now account for about 12% of total investment. Inter-BRICS trade is growing. Development cooperation from water and sanitation to solar energy. We are doing a whole gamut of things and showing that there is a path ahead for South-South cooperation where leading emerging economies, instead of being mired in continuous geopolitical strife and conflict, can also actually put together something which is not just an alternative to the Bretton Woods system and to the Western system, but also upkeeping.
Many points were made there, but it seems that the question about whether BRICS is relevant or not has long been surpassed. Is it a question now of the old world rather looking towards BRICS and saying, okay, well, this is what we need to do. We need to put more money in our infrastructure. Look at the UK as an example.
Well, quite. I mean, the irony here is that, the world used to be divided into 3 distinct camps. There was the developing nations, the emerging nations, and the developed. Unfortunately, what has happened is the developed nations have found themselves more or less in the position in terms of infrastructure as the developing nations. In fact, China is probably way ahead of where the United States is, and because of the aging infrastructure. China has put theirs in new. The U.S., it's in cases 50, 100 years old when you come to bridges and tunnels. So there is this kind of irony that those who are looking to climb the greasy pole, get beyond the middle income trap, are literally battling up against countries who have literally the same problems. They need money for their own infrastructure, but that means that the U.S. will not be providing money anytime soon to India or anywhere else for their infrastructure because they can't afford it. They simply don't have the funds to do it. Donald Trump is looking to borrow at least $1 trillion to be put into infrastructure. The truth is that the U.S. needs over $6 trillion in current account deficit in terms of the infrastructure that it has. In terms of China and the rest of these countries, I think it would be worthwhile to consider this. You have 3 resource countries. You have 3 huge market countries. The difficulty is that resources are a cyclical market. When times are good, they're very good. And when they're bad, they're very bad. But if these 5 could come together and figure out a way to even this cycle out, put some aside during the good years, and then supplement during the bad years, this would be a tremendous economic accomplishment, and it would allow these resource countries in particular to be more able to balance their economies, to continue the growth that they start when they're in the boom times and continue it through the bust times.
And infrastructure is something that we see happening throughout these developing world economies, countries, Aly-Khan Satchu. And this is yet another issue that unites all of these countries, these BRIC countries. With infrastructure, we've seen a lot of corruption. How big a problem is that? Not only drawing investment, but assuring security.
Absolutely, and I find it quite amusing that we get a lot of high-flown rhetoric about corporate governance, about all these kinds of things, but you know, BRICS has largely promoted what's called a non-interference policy with countries within themselves and countries that they're talking about BRICS plus as well. And I don't think it's been one of their strongest suits when it comes to corporate governance or anti-corruption policies. Russia, Brazil, China. Look, Xi Jinping's trying to get on top of things more than any of the other countries. So clearly, we've seen enormous amounts of wastage. There is an infrastructure deficit. It's enormous. In Africa alone, they estimate it to be $100 billion a year. But, you know, whilst appreciating we've seen the infrastructure come in, the point I would make, the main infrastructure investment has not come out of BRICS. It's come out of China under the One Belt, One Road scheme, where they've piled in, you know, simply mind-boggling sums of money. But if you look at what's happening, all the roads and railways lead to Beijing. They do not lead elsewhere. Beijing is at the heartbeat of the OBOR. And I think BRICS it remains a dominant force in BRICS as well. And one's got to look at BRICS in the context of China, not necessarily in the context of these other countries. South Africa, for example, is a tag-along. You know, we've had President Zuma's voice on the sub-Saharan African stage is entirely diluted. No one's listening to what Zuma's saying anywhere other than in South Africa, and only if they can't avoid it. So we've got a very interesting dynamic here. There are lots of moving parts, but essentially what I'm seeing now, and what I saw in China with this recent BRICS summit, was the emergence of a primary leader in the BRICS complex. That's China. That's Xi Jinping.
Sreeram, is it all about China and the One Belt, One Road project? Where does that leave countries like BRICS? India, for example, I know not too happy about that.
Yes, but you know, I would still go back to the point that there is a kind of momentum for collective decision making and for multilateralism. This is not, there's no reason for the other 4 member countries to tag along, really. They have their own choices, and we have not
but
been
is it
coerced
weighted in
to
favor
join BRICS
of
by China.
here at India's peril and the other countries' peril?
I don't think so. If you look at the way the decision making has happened, it's pretty democratic. And the Chinese have come to realize that is why they invest more in their unilateral projects like One Belt, One Road, which is outside this multilateral consensus-based framework, because they cannot completely have their say. And therefore, if you look at, even the declaration that's come out of Xiamen in the summit that's just concluded, the biggest achievement for India and is to actually persuade China to name Pakistan-based extremist jihadist organizations as subjects of concern that must be acted upon. So if China were just, ruling the roost here, they would not have even consented to this. So I think there's a lot of, one has to actually get into the diplomatic process, the way it is functioning. We want to set an example for a just and equitable world order, and we are doing it through our own personal interactions among these. There was a border standoff that you mentioned earlier, and which had caused heartburn on both sides, but it's been resolved amicably. So that shows that there is a degree of maturity. We do have rivalries, but we are managing them, and I think that itself is a major success. And no other grouping of this nature, which brings emerging powers from different continents, can actually get along so well. So I think we have set an example for the world. We would hope that this becomes the basis for other emerging economies, less developed countries, to also form groupings that are not just regional, like African Union or Mercosur or ASEAN, but to also think about inter-regional connections, bringing the whole global south together. So there's a lot of idealism behind this, and I think we've invested a lot. Our
this
hopes,
idealism,
our aspirations, our dreams,
China's
our
calling
blood
for a
and
more
sweat.
just world order. What does it mean when referring to BRICS and also a good governance, considering the human rights abuses going on inside China, for example? Shouldn't that be addressed before you can make comments like this?
Well, I think China's point of view would be that there are human rights abuses going on everywhere. The question is, who is defining what is human rights abuse and what is involved? I'm not going to say that I agree with everything that the Chinese government does, but Beijing is trying very hard to move its country forward. It is not doing it in ways that are objectionable to 99% of the people. You have 87% of the people of China who say that they are hopeful that tomorrow will be better than today. If you go to most developed countries, the number is much lower. So, this idea that somehow we have to judge every country hasn't worked so far. And where we've implemented in places like Iraq, Afghanistan, and other places, we have not created solutions. We've created more problems, and in some cases, now looking intractable. So I think the era of the policeman of the world is now over. It's a multilateral world. People are different. Governments are different. I think these countries have to work it out themselves. It is not a situation where you can come in, ride into with a white horse and decide what is good for the people that you are doing. This is a kind of colonial attitude.
Okay,
in terms of BRICS
but sorry, can I just say,
it's
for
a
the
new
ongoing
kind
credibility,
of
if I can
entity,
just bring in
Aly-Khan
here, for ongoing credibility of these member states, surely they need to sort out their domestic troubles, particularly in light of the fact that they are looking towards bringing in new members. And this will put South Africa in a difficult position, including Brazil, if Mexico comes on board.
Absolutely, and I think that seems to be the theme going forward. This BRICS plus theory, and I think it's going to dilute the voices of certain players who've been very powerful because they've been in that. South Africa being one. It's given them extra heft and weight across the world. It's also brought quite considerable assistance at a time when the economy has been quite weak. But yes, you are right. I think we're going to see the dilution of a number of voices and the emergence of new ones. In the case of Africa, I think definitely we're going to see the dilution of South Africa's voice and the emergence of a voice from the east side, and I think that will be Kenya, and from the west side, Nigeria, or maybe even Ghana. So I think we're going to see this thing morph and change. We're going to see different voices come through. But ultimately, I think, issues like corporate governance, like human rights, have really become secondary. The argument has been we're uplifting our people. Whilst we're doing that, it's a bit like the Kagame model. We don't want to be questioned on our human rights record. And as long as you're growing and you're performing, people give you a free pass. The problem occurs, one, when you hit a certain per capita GDP, which China is doing, and you're seeing China now take a much more intrusive, more of a surveillance-type state approach to snuff out any issues at source. And we're likely to see this sort of strong man, strong approach find more flavor, because that's the way the world seems to be moving at the moment.
Einar, does having a group like BRICS behind a country like China give it more confidence when it comes to dealing with threats from Donald Trump when he tweeted that the United States is considering, in addition to other options, stopping all trade with any country doing business with North Korea? I mean, that would affect China the most.
Well, if he stops all business, that would also affect India, because India is the number 2 trader, with just behind China. China is disproportionately large. But you have to kind of look and have some idea of what we're talking about here. On one hand, when somebody from North Korea buys a piece of clothing or a DVD player or some sort of electronics from China, that is not helping the nuclear program. However, when the various businesses that are run by these North Korean embassies, for instance in India, when they're producing cash and sending that back, yes, that cash is being used to help the state promulgate its current actions in terms of being nuclear. So have some nuance when you look at this. It's not just sheer numbers. The question is, how is it being used? This issue, this narrative that somehow China is to blame because North Korea is going nuclear. Let us pause for a moment and consider that this event has taken place while Xi Jinping was trying to have a major impact on a very big group in saying that China and BRICS are an alternative. So that was the time that Kim Jong-un decided he needed to blow off a nuclear bomb and announce that he was going to, and also some missiles. So this is aimed primarily at China. North Korea wants to keep China as isolated as possible. Beijing knows this. They're not friendly towards North Korea. They just fear, one, that if there is an armed war, you're looking at a contagion that would send people, North Koreans, across the border. You would have a civil war going on there. That's in a regime change. Or you'd have some sort of massive nuclear war.
Sorry, I'm going to just bring Sreeram in, if you don't mind. Forgive me for jumping in here, but we just got one more.
Are very palatable to anybody.
Sure, we just got one more question here, Sreeram. I mean, looking towards the next 10 years, are we going to see greater military cooperation between these players, considering, what we've been talking about as far as North Korea is concerned? Where is the bloc headed now?
Hopefully, we will see more progress on collective security mechanisms that we are evolving. I think even on a question like North Korea, BRICS is unanimous and that we don't want war. We want a peaceful and negotiated settlement. We don't want any kind of preemptive or preventive attacks that can spiral out of control and lead to catastrophe. I think we are going to empower each other in our respective regions to take the lead, and the rest of the members are going to fall behind and support those initiatives for peace and for conflict resolution. I think counter-terrorism, we are moving very, very far, and I think that is really the most hopeful arena, because Russia, China, and India especially are all threatened by jihadist extremism, and we all have found common ground at BRICS. And BRICS is also eventually going to somewhat massage the bilateral tensions, because prestige is at stake. We can't be seen to be squabbling and fighting all the time and putting the interests of the other players, taking them to hostage. This is a multilateral process. We have all acted with greater maturity and showing the world that it is possible to think of a different order in which not only are we moving from west to east or from north to south,
okay,
but also
let's
one
leave it
based
there,
on
please,
different set of
Sreeram.
principles that are less
we've run out of
rapacious and
time.
less
Thank you very
exploitative.
much to all three of my guests, Sreeram, Einar, Tangen, and Aly-Khan Satchu. And thank you too for watching. You can see the program again anytime by visiting our website, aljazeera.com. And for further discussion, go to our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/ AJ Inside Story. You can also join the conversation on Twitter. Our handle is @AJ Inside Story. From me, Jane Dutton, the rest of the team, bye-bye for now.